Hey guys, what's up? Thank you for being here. Thank you for joining me on another podcast of Invest with Obi. Today, I am so happy to have Sheri Duignan here. She's super amazing in the investing world. She's done some multifamily, she's done some private money lending, and she's actually now getting into buying RV parks. Sheri, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Ricardo. I appreciate you having me on, and excited to kind of talk a little bit about my history and sort of where I'm going and how I got there.
Yeah. So, we've kind of been, working, Paces kind of has had us work together in some accountability groups for the past couple of weeks now, right? And I just want to say thank you so much for all the knowledge that you've shared with me, right? I know we have some podcasts coming up, on one of the deals that you've done, right? That literally blew my mind. It was crazy. I can't wait to actually talk to people about it, right? It's going to
Yeah,
be super cool, right?
yeah.
So to kick off, right, I want to start by kind of sharing and, having people kind of like know your story. What is it about real estate? Like, what is that called your attention to real estate? How you got started? I want to talk about some wins.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds great. It's kind of an interesting story. I feel like it's just I'm all over the place with my real estate background, but my career for 20 something years was in the fitness industry. So I grew up actually right out of high school into college, studying sports medicine and doing fitness stuff, and absolutely loved it. It's one of my like hobbies, I'd say. My husband and I got married in Maryland and moved down to Atlanta, and we bought a house down here and settled in. We were here for about 8 years, and the company I was working for at the time in fitness wanted to move me out to Phoenix, actually Gilbert, Arizona. And so I had read, just none of my family, they didn't invest in real estate. I didn't really know anything about investing in real estate, but I had read, everybody reads Rich Dad, Poor Dad, right? And so I had kind of known a little bit about investing in real estate and rental properties and, the benefits of them. Um, Being that they wanted to move me to Arizona and my family was all on the East Coast, I did not want to sell my house that we lived in. And so our thought was, we could just rent it out. And I had no idea anything about rental properties. And so literally talked to my husband. I said, look, we want to come back to this neighborhood. We love this house. Let's just we'll rent it out while we're gone. We'll go to Phoenix, we'll come back, and we'll move back in again. And so he agreed. I really literally went down to Home Depot, went into one of the aisles, and I found that they had a little for rent sign, and I stuck it in the yard. And back then, okay, so this was in 2004. And so I went into the Penny Saver because it wasn't really all online stuff, obviously, at that time. And I looked up what people were paying in rent. And at the time, I think it was $12.50. It was a 5-bedroom, 3-bath house, like 3,000 square feet, but it was like $12.50 in rent. Sounds good. It'll cover my mortgage by like $100. It wasn't going to cover much, but it was covering my mortgage. And so I posted in there, and lo and behold, a lady responded to the ad, and I said, yeah, come see it. She came and saw the house. She said, I love it. It's everything I want. How much is the rent? I told her, what the rent was. And she said, okay, how do I apply? And I said, well, I just needed a deposit and the first month's rent, and let's do this. So I had no background check. I did no credit check. Right. I literally had no idea what I was doing. So she ended up moving in. Wonderful lady, but I'll fast forward. She ended up renting the property for 10 years. Whoa. Which was amazing. And I was 3,000 miles away at this point. Actually, by the time she left, I was in California. So I was far, far away. I was self-managing, which again, I really didn't know what I was doing, but she didn't call me with anything. She never had any issues. Like very rarely, every now and then, the AC in the summer, because it's Atlanta, would have an issue, and I'd call a neighbor or a friend and, have them go check it out. She was there for 10 years, and we had our ups and downs. She was late on rent. She got behind. She had different issues, here and there. I actually lowered the rent during, the 2008, 2009. I lowered the rent a little bit for her just to keep her in place. So long and short of it, she was there for 10 years. She was getting further and further behind. And so I finally decided we really need to get her out of the house. We could have gotten a little bit higher rent. So we gave her notice. She ended up moving out. When she moved out, this is kind of a funny story real quick, but we had all these recessed lightings like this, right? And it was a 2-story, you need a ladder to get in, 2-story family room. She took every single light bulb out of the ceiling. She was
What?
upset because I made her leave and they had lived there. I think they were to buy the house at some point, from me. So, anyway, my husband and I flew back to Atlanta. We rented, or I'm sorry, we borrowed a air mattress and we camped on the floor of the property. Our neighbors came and brought all kinds of tools and like landscaping stuff for us. Like they brought their lawnmowers over and they brought some tools for us. They gave us sheets and towels and stuff so that we could stay and, kind of camp in the living room of the house. My dad came down in his RV and camped in the driveway, and we flipped this house, brand new roof, brand new paint outside, all new flooring, like all new fixtures, like updated it from the 1990s to, the 2010 era. Landscapes did all this work because they did after 10 years of me not even being in the property. And, the house was a disaster. It wasn't a disaster, but it was not clean. So I say all of that to say, my first experience, I had no experience. I had no idea what I was doing. I truly wasn't cash flowing. Now that I'm a true investor full time, there's no such thing as cash flow when you're just paying your mortgage, like any expenses were coming out of my pocket. And thankfully I had a good job, but I also had never like flipped a house. Right. And I flew back and I got contractors and hired in roofers and painters. And then we did a lot of landscape and little things and stuff. My dad, fortunately, is very handy. My brother-in-law even came and helped out. And so we were able to like flip the property in about 14 days. We did everything in the house. I mean,
Wow.
brand new, 3,000 square feet, 5-bedroom house.
So
So
house.
yeah, so it was pretty cool. We decided to rent it again. And I had a neighbor, oh my gosh, Donna, my neighbor, she was amazing. She was a realtor. So she was able to list it and get it listed again for rent. We raised our rent quite a bit at that point, obviously. And now we were a little bit more, I'll say, truly cash flowing at that point. And we kept it as a rental until this year. So we had it as a rental for 20 years. That was our first entry into rental properties. I started understanding a little bit more about rental properties a couple years later. And when we moved to California, we made a ton of money on our house in Arizona because it was pre 2008. And so we took that money and we bought a couple more rental properties in Raleigh, North Carolina off the MLS through an agent. Just, again, still not understanding the numbers and how it really worked. We covered our mortgage for the most part, and that was about it. And we sold those rentals in the last year or two as well. And so we started kind of getting into rental properties. But I got this taste of flipping houses when we lived in it for that 1 week when we camped in it. And I was like, you know what? There's got to be more.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of like, long, quick, version of my history of how I got into real estate. And that led me to start pursuing possibly flipping, buying more rentals, things like that. And so another just piece of that, I got back, started learning about how to flip, learned of Homevestors, which is a franchise for flipping houses, ended up buying a franchise. Had to quit my full-time job though, because they were going to make me go full-time with Homevestors. And I couldn't do that and do my full-time job. So I literally like walked in it was in December 16th. It was my last day in 2000, what was it? 8 years ago, 9 years ago, I walked into my boss's office after 20 years almost with this company and said, I'm done. I had no idea what I was doing. I'd only flipped one house and it wasn't really even a flip, right? I had literally just got and cleaned up my house to make it a rental again. But I just knew I could do it. I was like, I don't know, I'm going to figure it out. And that's a little bit how I do things is, and I feel like everybody else should do a little bit of that, probably a little more research than maybe I do. But, so many people think they need to know everything to get started.
Yeah.
And honestly, I mean, if you know a little, I probably knew enough to get in trouble. You can get started, and real estate is very forgiving. I mean, I wasn't cash flowing, and I was definitely pouring money into the property along the way, with some repairs. But I was able to, over time, we made tons of money out of that property when it, as it went up in value, and on top of, paying down the mortgage. So it's
You said something just now that resonates with me. Because I'm just learning this now too. It's like real estate is very forgiving, you know?
yeah,
And I never put it into words until you just said it now though,
yeah,
right? As long as you're not doing crazy stuff,
yeah,
like buying a property and being negative cash flow
cash flow,
$1,000, that's ridiculous, you know?
right,
I
yeah,
mean, you don't want to be, buying a property and having to come out of pocket. But let's just say you are having to come out of pocket, just don't let it be too much,
right.
you know?
And
a
that was the thing,
hundred,
like, we
200,
weren't.
$800, you can live, right? And then eventually the market's going to correct itself, you know,
Yes. And
eventually
let's.
the buy down, the principal buy down starts happening,
Yes.
eventually your rents go up, you know? So that actually does resonate with me because I was like, damn,
Yeah.
she's so right.
I mean, that's the thing, like, I bought everything. If you look at it now and I look back, I go, "Oh my god, I bought every one of my rental properties in the beginning wrong." And then I still bought them wrong even after a couple of mistakes because I was paying market value. I was paying, just whatever they were selling for on the MLS, right? And so I was paying the full commissions and all those things. My rents were just barely covering my mortgages. And back then, though, you could still I did 10% cash down, so 10% of my own money, 10% like a second, like a line of credit, and then 20% so I could avoid PMI. You can't do that, I don't think, anymore. But that was before, again, everything before 2008. So I bought everything wrong. But like you said, there's, 5 different ways you make money in, real estate, right? You got, you buy it obviously sometimes with equity, but if you don't, it's going to appreciate over time. Even if it depreciates. During 2008, they all lost value, but they eventually came back and went up. Uh, and I do have a story with that too, but they come back, and then your rents over time go up. You're paying down your principal mortgage, and then you also have tax advantages. My husband and I didn't have kids. We were making 6 figures, both of us in our full-time jobs. And so it was a tax deduction for us to reduce our taxable income as well. So that's kind of why we were doing it, to be able to use that money for our retirement, to be able to retire, as well as tax benefits. So we weren't really concerned about cash flowing because we were paying all our bills with our salaries. It was more of having that tax reduction for what we were making, and in the long-term game of retirement.
So I know that we've been speaking for some time now. I know that you do some private money lending, right? And that's another avenue for investors that don't
Yeah.
want to properties, that don't
Yeah.
want anything to do with rehabs, that don't want anything to do with going to look for a deal, learning how to run numbers, looking at properties and going to them and saying, hey, I want to buy your property, right? So I want you to share a little bit about that, right? And if you could kind of touch, just a little bit on what the possibilities are with that, for somebody who let's just say has 20, 30, $50,000, in hand that says, hey, I want to lend this money.
Right.
What are the possibilities? What could I possibly get in return? You know, 'Cause I've been doing it for some time now and I'm like, wow, that's freaking cool. But you've been doing it for far longer than I have. So I want them to hear from you.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. Yeah. So transitioned down the road. I've been lending now for a while. We took some of our equity out of our properties and decided to start doing it as lending. It's a little more predictable income, right? Because you don't have vacancies to worry about. You're not, like I say, you're not dealing with tenants. So I got into the private lending because it was just trying to diversify for one. But you can get, it depends again on the property, but you can get returns anywhere from, like, say, 8% up to 15 and even 18% returns on your money. So that, like, is mind blowing. And again, you're not dealing with tenants. You're not dealing with, it's way more, I'll say it's way more passive, but it is still technically active, right? You still need to make sure that the renovations are going, well, and, the project's moving along, and, things aren't going wrong, that kind of thing. But for the most part, once you find the deal, and, I work with people who are doctors, attorneys. I've got a guy, he's a garage door, he fixes and installs garage doors, and they have capital, but like they don't have access to the deals, right? And they don't know how to analyze the deals. They just want to invest in something that's backed and secured by real estate, um, that's going to earn them a solid return. So the way it works, what I do is I will take people, like you're saying, that maybe only have $20,000 or $30,000 or $50,000 to invest, and I partner with them, and we can put our money together. Sometimes we'll partner, it might be 50-50 or whatever it might be, so that we get a first position mortgage on, note on the property. And for those who don't understand private money lending, it is just like Chase Bank. If you go and get a mortgage on your property, they get a deed and they're usually in what they call first position. And so we get a first position promissory note. It's recorded against the property and it's secured by that asset. So if something goes wrong, we have first right before even the owner, before the fix and flipper, we kind of have that right to get repaid our money before they see any profits if something went wrong, right? And so we put our money together. I help vet the deal. I send them the deal. So they obviously they can say yay or nay if they like the deal or if there's issues with it. And then we partner together. And then they get a monthly payment every single month. I call it mailbox money.
Yep.
But they get a monthly payout of the interest. And again, that's anywhere from say 8% up to, 18% that they get every single month. And then when the property has been renovated and, flipped and sold, then they get their money, their capital returned back to them. And then we can redeploy it again. And sometimes they'll roll that interest, back into it and they'll just, bank it
Yep.
aside. And then they roll it back in and now they have more to invest and they get a bigger return. I have some people that have a couple $100,000. And so we diversify them into multiple loans to, again, just reduce risk. There is some risk involved in lending, and that, again, the market could turn. I mean, we saw what happened in 2008. There were a lot of people who were fix and flipping and they went out of business. They lost all their properties, right? So there is a possibility that something like that could happen. So we want to be as secure as possible by lending at a lower leverage that, should something turn, we can still get rid of the property and, get all our capital back. Or maybe we have to pivot and now make it as a rental and we might have to just wait a little longer until we get our money back out of that property.
Yeah,
Makes sense?
like you were saying earlier, real estate is forgiving. You
Yeah.
know, if
Yep.
if it does happen, like, okay, well, guess what? Now we got to shift. It's like everything else, right? Pace has taught us, like, hey, adapt and overcome,
That's
right?
right.
The market shifted. Let's
Yep.
figure it. So
Yeah.
you mentioned something like the market is very forgiving, right? So like if things were to happen, the market, tanks for whatever reason. Okay, well, I mean, Pace has taught us, hey, you got to adapt and overcome, right? So now
Right.
you rent it out. You got to wait till the market gets back up. You know, for the most part, you did mention that. Okay, well, you lend, and let's just say you lend at 15%, right? So there's like different types of length of loans: a month, 3 months, 2 months, 6 months, right? So I mean, I tell people all the time, like the people that I lend for as well. It's like, well, if you're lending at 15% interest for 6 months, right, and you do that twice, you just made 30%. You know,
Right.
I'm
Well, if
like,
that's a flat rate, yeah. If it's
yeah,
annual, you need to be making your
yeah,
15%. Correct. Yep.
So,
Absolutely.
and that's kind of like what I've kind of been doing. I'm like, this, I just do flat rate, you know, that's it, because I really don't want to mess with the APY. It's just easier for me, you know,
Yeah.
but
And a
it's
lot
it's,
of
it's
people,
very cool.
yeah, a lot of people, I have done some deals where we do a flat rate. It depends. So each property, and that's what I love also about, the private lending space and being a private lender is that you can actually, like, you could do a flat rate, you could do an annualized rate, you could do a 6-month loan, you can do a 12-month loan. You can make it, whatever the terms that, you dictate, and then the interest rate as well, based on the risk of the deal, the borrower, all that. And so I vet the borrowers. So I make sure that they are somebody that, has experience, that can do, the fix and flip. They're maybe not a brand new person. And then I also vet the deal to make sure it's in, it's not in a, suburban area and they're comping it against it's a 2-bedroom, 1 bath, and they're comping against a 5 or 6 bedroom, something like that.
Yeah, no, for sure, for sure. Awesome. So thank you for that. So let's get into some of your losses. Like those are, like, to me, that's where you learn the most.
Yes.
You know, it's like, okay, what are your losses? Like those, to me, I think we've all lost plan. You know,
Yes.
and that's where we learn. Okay, well, we're not going to do that again because it hurts.
Yep.
You know, so what are your?
It is very painful. I'd say I've had several. I mean, it's funny because I have definitely pivoted and I've had several. I've gone from single family, then I got into the multifamily. Like you said, I got into, put money lending. And I've had losses along the way. And I will say again, back to sort of that, real estate is forgiving. I also think we need to be forgiving. So we need to understand that failure does not necessarily mean, I'm done. failure just means, we got to start again. We got to go back and relook at what we're doing. Right. And so probably my biggest failure that I would say is, or at least in my mind, what I felt like was a big failure was we had a rental property in Lake Elsinore, California that we had bought in 2006. We had made a bunch of money in our house out in Arizona. We invested most of it into other rentals, thankfully. And then the rest of it into our own personal home that we bought in California. Fast forward to 2009, the economy had crashed. We bought a house at about 500,000. It was now worth about 200,000. We tried renting it out. The rents out there at that time, because nobody wanted to go to Lake Elsinore anymore. We were getting 50% of our mortgage was being paid by the tenant, and the other 50% we were coming out of our pocket every single month. And so it was extremely tough to stomach, that I'm paying somebody to live in my house, right? And so we did that for a couple of years, to be honest. I think we did that until mid 2012. And as an investor, as I got more into true investing and started doing a lot more research, I just realized that it was a numbers game and it is a business, in a way, you got to treat it like a business. And so we ended up short selling that property and getting out of that property, like the deed in lieu and all that, like we got out of that property and we took a huge hit. And so that hit our credit obviously as well. So my point in that is, it was hard to stomach that, we lost a property that we couldn't just, treat it like a regular rental and sell it and be out and make lots of money. It also took a hit on our credit. So we were like, how are we going to buy any more properties? Right. And that kind of stopped me. I could have decided no more. I'm not buying anymore. It was devastating. All our other properties were down in value too. They didn't take quite the hit because they were in conservative areas. It didn't stop me. And what my husband and I decided to do was we lived on one of our salaries. And we took all of the other salary and we saved it up. And when we had enough, we went to the Indianapolis market and we bought our first rental in Indianapolis for about $50,000 cash. I think we invested another like 16,000 or so, maybe 20,000 into it. I think we were all in by the end of it, probably $75,000. We were able to rent it out for about $900 a month. So we bought a property cash through a wholesaler. I didn't even know anything about wholesalers prior to this, but so I had built-in equity a little bit going into it, and we rented that out. And so for the next several years, we bought a couple more cash rental properties at 35,000 and 50,000 and 75,000. I don't recommend the 30,000. They're horrible tenants. I'm not trying to say anything, but you get, it was in a bad area, I think more than anything. But we were getting rents, coming in, but we were having to buy the properties cash because we couldn't use our credit. And so instead of kind of stopping buying rentals, I just said, okay, we can't do it this way. How are we going to do it? And I learned of wholesaling. I learned how to buy actually turnkey is really kind of how I bought it. Through a turnkey provider, and they put the tenant in place and they managed it. And that's how I learned about property management. The property management ended up being horrible. So I had to, over time, learn, find a new one. But I was able to continue to buy properties. And we still have one of those properties in Indianapolis. And it has now, I don't know, tripled in value. And I think if I were to sell it today, I think I'd sell it for like $275.
Wow.
And I bought it in like 2014, I think, or something like that. So
that's more money to lend.
Yeah. So, well, it's still, unfortunately, it's tied up right now in the property. But my point, I guess, again, is that was a failure. And a lot of people would have looked at that and said, okay, I'm done, and hung up their real estate hat. But it made me even more kind of like, how am I going to figure this out? And mostly because I think for us, we did not have a great retirement plan through our company. My husband and I both worked for the same company. And so we needed that, because I didn't understand stocks. I mean, I didn't really understand real estate still, obviously. But I knew a lot more by that point. By 2012, I was way better off than I was in 2004 when I started. But that was how we, decided to continue back. And so it only took us a couple of years for our credit to come back. Thankfully, it could have been, longer, it could have been worse. And then we were able to kind of go back to buying, but we didn't really need our credit at that point. Then we learned of private money lending. So I was on the recipient side when I was flipping, when I was buying properties, of using private money mortgages for my properties. And so I was like, wait, I'm paying all these people all this money.
Yeah.
Why don't I do this? You know?
Yep.
And that's kind of how I got started.
That's
That's
yep.
one of my failures. I've had plenty. Is there another one? Let's see. What another one we should talk about?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if you got
Did
enough,
lose money
if
on a
you're
flip.
okay to share, let's go.
Yeah, I did
I
lose.
think it's super important for people to understand because you're in a much better place now, right? And by what I mean about that is like, look at the beautiful house that you're living in, right?
Right.
Like you have such a beautiful house, right? I mean, not for nothing, like moving up on that tax bracket gets you better stuff,
Yes.
but you gotta pay more taxes too, right?
Yes.
But to talk to that person that's thinking about like, I want to get into real estate, right?
Right.
Is this doable? Like
Yeah.
talking about the failures, like you lost, you had to file, you had to sell the house on short sale.
Yeah.
That took a huge hit in your credit. But look at you now.
Yeah.
I think that's huge.
And I think too, like I also took a huge hit. This is kind of another story, but it ties into the lending even. I was again using private money lending. So I was flipping houses. I bought my franchise, Homevestors in Southern California in Orange County. So one of the probably most expensive places in the entire country to flip houses. It wasn't my original plan. I was hoping to be in Atlanta here where I am now. But I ended up with a franchise there, and I was buying $500,000, $700,000 fixer upper properties, and I had to keep the machine going to continue to keep getting, the advertising and all that to keep getting leads. So I couldn't keep all my money tied up in the property. For one, like while it was being fixed and flipped and stuff. So I had to use other people's money. So I learned of private money. I happened to be in a RIA one time and they said, there's like a wishes and desires, I think was what we got to stand up. And so I had a house under contract and I was trying to figure out how I was going to buy it. And I needed a private money lender. And I stood up and I said, I need $40,000 to, close this property. I think it was 40 or 50. And a guy came up to me afterwards and said, "Hey, what do you need? Tell me the property." And I gave him the numbers and he trusted me. His name was Juan. He may end up watching this at some point because we still stay in touch. But he ended up lending me money on this property. And I don't remember at the time, but I want to say it was like 10% I was paying him in interest rates. And I was a newer flipper at that time. So, but I ended up losing money on that property. I lost almost about as much as I had borrowed from him. It was a 55 and older community. There was a lot of inventory. So I made the executive decision to make it that much nicer than everybody else's.
Hmm.
And the biggest lesson I took away was people that are in a 55 and older community, they are on a budget. They're thinking about how long is their money going to last them, right? And it might be their next to last house, last house. And so they are, it's one of those things where everybody loved it. But they're like, but just down the street, there's one that's just as nice, but it's a lot less
Yeah.
money. So it sat on the market forever and it ate up on my profit. But the lesson in that is I paid that lender back. He never knew until I was sharing a story like this online and he saw it. He goes, "You lost money?" He never even knew. I had to come out of pocket and pay that money out of the profits that I had been making and out of, the money that we had. And sometimes you have to maybe make payments over time, to those people, but you got to make your lenders whole, your
Yeah, you
cash.
definitely have to make the lender slow. And that's one of the biggest things that I've learned through this, and not everyone's the same,
Right. Yeah.
not everyone's the same.
Yeah, and that's why it's important to know who your borrowers are and who you're working with for sure. But that again could have stopped me and could have, froze me, but it did not, and it was just like, hey, it was a lesson I learned, I didn't buy in 55 and older anymore. I was done with that. I was like, nope, not going to do those properties, but there's things like that happen and you just got to roll with it.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Like I said, that I think people will learn more from our mistakes than our wins.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. So
Yeah.
last question, like I want to talk to you about, first things first, shout out to Jamil, right? And Pace.
Yes.
Like honestly, like one of the biggest things in life is just that changing that mindset.
Yeah.
And they have helped me a lot, you know,
Yes.
not just them, but given the past couple of years, they have been my mentors and they have
Right.
changed my mindset so much. And then hanging around with cool people like yourself has helped me so much too. So I thank you for that. But they
You
have us
know,
working on on our Mount Everest, right? So
Yes.
what is your Mount Everest?
So, my 5-year goal down the road, my Mount Everest, is to create, and it's kind of funny, it ties into the senior housing, but is to create an affordable community for seniors age 55 and older. Uh, Basically, what I found, and so I'll just back up and tell kind of how I got there. When I was flipping houses in Southern California, most of the sellers that I was working with were seniors in their 80s, women who were generally widowed. Their husbands had passed away, and all their equity was tied up in their house. But every time they were like, "I don't have anywhere to go." It was so unaffordable in Southern California at that time, right? And this is now in like 2018, 19, there was 17, 18. There was nowhere that they could go. Anything that they would buy was going to be almost the same size as what they like. The average American house that's out there is a 3-2, or a 4, 4-2 or 4, bigger house. And it was still more house than what they needed. And so I saw a need. The other thing that I also realized was most of them were miserable because their neighborhoods had turned over. There was kids in the neighborhood, none of their friends, a lot of them had passed away or, things like that. And so they lost their sense of community. And yet they didn't want to move into an apartment. They didn't want to move into, assisted living. They weren't at that point. Well, my Mount Everest is to create a community of micro homes is what we want to call them. So micro homes meaning a tiny house, but on a foundation. So a built house, just like a regular house with 4 walls on a foundation, but 500, even maybe 450, 500 square feet up to about 900 square feet. And they will have their own small little front porches and a small little piece of land. And then basically it'll be built on the foundation of community coming together. So shared gardens, shared amenities, sharing libraries, little coffee shops, things like that they can use. So we want to make it affordable and right sized to something that makes sense for them.
That's awesome. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's
Hold on one second.
super cool. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Hold on one second. Unbelievable. I've got guests that are supposed to be checking in at 4 o'clock. They're here now because of the snow situation. I guess they came early. My husband's trying to get them into the unit, but they can't. The door's not working and blah, blah, blah. And so he's them.
My goodness. All right. Cool, cool, cool. All right. So,
Anyway,
all right. So let's, probably we got maybe another 5, 10 minutes. Let's say we're done. Right?
okay.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Here we go.
I'm sorry if I'm going too long.
No, no, that's cool. All right. So, that's cool. A lot of people that I've met in the owners club, including myself, we're trying to do the shared living space model, but you're trying to do something slightly different where they actually have their own place,
Yes.
an actual community. I do remember having this conversation with you in Boston, right? And I'm like, man, yeah. And we were supposed to actually have this podcast, way before. And I'm like,
Right.
and I completely just remember, I'm like, oh my God, that was you. I'm like, man. So I'm so glad we're freaking doing. I completely
Yeah.
forgot that it was you though. I'm like, oh man, I remember this. Right? Because
Yeah.
nobody has that business model. Nobody wants to that well, not that everybody wants to do,
Yeah.
but no
There's a little bit of there are some neighborhoods that exist. They're kind of called pocket neighborhoods typically, but they're not always pocket neighborhoods are not always the small houses. They also have big houses. But yeah, it's sort of new, I'll say newer trend, in that most people are doing tiny homes, but on the wheels, right? And they're more of like a mobile home, right? But there's people that don't want to live in something like that. They really want to live in an actual home. They just want one that's more suited for them, right?
man, that is
Yeah.
super cool. That is super cool. So like I know you mentioned that, you've what was it? You said that you've had the experience through some people, having to go through, living in neighborhoods that basically they don't know anybody anymore,
Right.
right?
Yes.
Um, a lot of their, friends are dead, unfortunately,
Yeah.
right? So I
Yeah.
was like, man, that is super cool because honestly, I'm still in awe because I've never heard of pocket neighborhoods
Right.
like until we spoke in Boston. So I was like, oh, I didn't even know that was a thing.
Yeah.
So I thank you so much for
And it's
doing that, and
yeah.
I'm sure, right, that, maybe eventually, you and I maybe work on that one day, even
I'd
if
love
it
that.
is as a private money lender, you know,
Yep.
because,
Yeah.
you need capital to get things done, right?
Yes.
So
Absolutely.
that's cool.
Yeah, no, it's a neat concept, and I think that, they say that, socialization is just as important as exercise for,
Yes.
for humans.
Yes.
We are social, creatures. And so when people are in isolation, they usually will not do as well as, people who are around other people. So the idea of bringing them together and putting them in a home so that it's their own homes, they have their own four walls, not like the co-living, because they're generally coming out of a house that they're used to living on their own. They're older, set in their ways, but it has that community that can help them all around them, and having a little coffee shop that they can all have coffee together, or lunch together, that kind of thing.
That's super cool. That's super cool.
Yeah.
So because I know you're doing the private money lending. You're trying to get this Mount Everest built, right? So
Yes.
I also want to talk about your workshop, right?
Yes.
You got a
Yes.
workshop coming in. I know that I'm going to do my best to attend,
Okay.
right?
Yes.
I just want to learn so much more from you, right? So where do we have a date yet?
So I don't have a date for the actual, we're going to do a live workshop, but I do have a webinar coming up that I'm doing on January 15th. So next Wednesday, or I don't know when this is going to air, but we do have a workshop, a webinar that's going to come up. I'm going to be recording that. And then
Is this going to be live?
it is going to be live. Yes. So it is going to be live with people being able to ask questions. So we're going to go through how to get started. Like, what is private lending? How does it work? What are the pitfalls to avoid? Mistakes I've made, mistakes, people have made, how to avoid those, how to find the borrowers, how to vet the borrowers, how to find the deal, how to vet the deal. So we're going to take it start to finish, kind of through the whole thing, all the paperwork that goes into it. So on the webinar, it's going to be probably about an hour and a half that will go through all the ins and outs. And then the goal is that we will also then do the workshop, which is going to be a 2-day workshop. And we may even do it over a course of a 6 week. We may also have a 6 week course that we just dive in more of like a boot camp style, where we go through everything much more deep dive. So you're just going to get that much more detail of, we're actually going to like vet deals together and look at, things together
Yeah.
and vet borrowers and look at real life scenarios. Whereas the webinar is going to be a little bit more of like that overview. It's definitely going to be an intensive on all the ins and outs, but the workshop is just going to bring that much more, you know,
So where can the viewers reach you, right? Your Instagram, right?
yep.
Email or
Well, I have a
something?
YouTube channel. It's just my name, Sheri Duignan, and that's Sheri is it's spelled I think down here, but Sheri. It's nothing's easy on my name, and then my last name Duignan. So I have a YouTube channel. I do have an Instagram and my Facebook. They're all under my name. On my website, if they want to go to my website, it's Opportunity Enterprises LC. And actually, if they want to learn a little bit more about private lending, I do also have a free ebook that they can get. They can download an e-copy of this, again, on how to become a private money lender. It's a lot of the same stuff that, we'll cover in more depth live, obviously, in the webinar and in the workshop as well. But if they want to fill that out, and then they can get some more information to you about the upcoming workshop and webinars coming up.
Perfect. Perfect. Beautiful. Thank you so much. So I'll definitely be attending the workshop, right?
Yeah, I
We
can't
spoke
wait.
a while ago, so I'm definitely going. I need to learn more from you. So,
Yes.
all right, Sherry, thank you so much for being here, guys. Thank you guys for joining us. Thank you for watching the podcast. All right. Until the next one.
Thank you so
Bye,
much for
Sherry.
having me on. Appreciate it. Bye.